Hi everybody, Brian Easton here, author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, and this is Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. Tonight we are having Rittenhouse Rye. American Rye is my favorite whiskey after the Creature from Tennessee, of course. So, what differentiates rye from bourbon or some of your other American whiskeys is that, according to the law that governs whiskey, it has to be made from distilled from at least 51% of rye grain, and it has to be aged in charred new oak barrels. We talked about that before, how the char on the inside of the barrels is what gives the whiskey its color. It all goes in clear as water, but while it's aged in charred barrels, it takes on the caramel kind of appearance that we tend to associate with whiskey. Now, rye whiskey, it has a very dry, almost black pepper bite to it. It's spicy, as opposed to the more full-bodied, sweet flavor of a bourbon, say. Now, American rye almost nearly vanished after Prohibition. Before Prohibition, whiskeys were largely rye. That was what they were made. What they were largely made from. After Prohibition, only a few brands of rye survived, including Old Overholt, which is bottled in bond to this day, and you can still get it at your local liquor store. But nowadays, rye has made a huge comeback. It's becoming, it's become a very popular kind of whiskey. And it's just experiencing a massive resurgence right now in this country, and you can tell that if you go to your liquor store and just kind of look at the selection of ryes that are out there from micro distilleries. There's just a lot of them to choose from, and it wasn't that so long ago that rye was not a real popular drink, but it's experiencing its revival, and kudos, because like I said, it's one of my favorites, and it's one of Sylvester's favorites, especially when he's in a foul mood. And if you've read the books, you know what I'm talking about. There's a second category of rye, which I thought I would mention. Canadian whiskey is sometimes referred to as rye whiskey, mostly for historical purposes and in a historical context, I should say. Even though the mash that's used for Canadian whiskey might not contain any rye in it whatsoever. It's just kind of a different category that can be confusing. Rye whiskey, American rye whiskey, and rye whiskey, if you're talking about it in a different context, you're talking about Canadian whiskey. Hey, I think we got a good show for you tonight, so stay with us. We've talked about silver bullets and why it can kill werewolves. We've talked about silver as a metal to make projectiles from. Now let's discuss a little bit about how werewolves are created instead of destroyed in my series Mythology. First of all, if you don't know, in my books, the werewolf group collectively are called the Lineage. So if you hear me talk about the Lineage, that's what I'm talking about, werewolves as a whole. Sometimes they refer to themselves as the Universal Pack. But at any rate, there are two primary methods to producing a werewolf. And these are called rites of provenance. They are methods by which a werewolf is created, and a werewolf can trace his genealogy, so to speak. The first is called the birthmark. The birthmark is marking or biting primarily. Biting is the primary way by which the birthmark is dispensed. And the rite of the birthmark calls for not just biting; it's a deliberate action on the part of the sire werewolf. When the sire werewolf bites
its prey, it has the intention, if it has the intention of making another one like itself and, continuing its line, then it deliberately, through that bite, imparts a part of its soul to the bitten person, which is the marking process. Like I said, it's usually done through a bite, but it can be transmitted, and is in my books, through other means, involving flesh and blood, eating the flesh, drinking the blood. And in this way, the individual werewolf shares a piece of its soul, like I said, and in turn, that little piece of a soul consumes the soul of its host. All right, consumes the soul of the marked person, and the ritual is generally sealed at first transformation, which is usually done typically during the first full moon that the new werewolf encounters. And at that time, the soul is completely corrupted, becomes one with the one soul of the lineage, and is pretty much forever lost to that person. Now, werewolves that are made through this particular rite of provenance, through this method, typically demonstrate a greater proclivity for cunning, malice, and cruelty than do those who are sired through the second rite of provenance, which is called the birthright. Now, the rationale for this is that through the mark, the soul is the first thing that is affected. It is directly affected by the bite, and it bears the initial impact. So if you ever want to come across the meanest, rottenest son of a bitch werewolf you've ever seen, chances are he is a birthmark wolf. He was sired through the first rite of provenance, the marking. Now, the birthright, get the birthmark, first rite of provenance. The second rite of provenance is called the birthright, or whelping. And just as the name implies, it involves being literally born or whelped into the lineage through procreation. And this tends to be favored by werewolves whose genealogy falls closest to the original six beast princes. And I will talk more about that, but basically there were 6 original werewolves in the world that the first werewolf decided to mark and make his princes on Earth. And from those 6 princes, the lineage became what it is. And so the right of provenance of the birthright is favored among those who can trace their lineage closest to those original 6 beast princes. And the young can result from either a lineage pairing, 2 werewolves reproducing, or it can come from a human parent, a werewolf and a human parent. And historically, these were often the products of rape. The offspring that are sired through the whelping tend to be physically stronger, more robust, and larger, more durable than those that are sired through the first provenance. And that is because through the physical act of reproduction, the body is the primary affected thing, not the soul. Which is not to say that the werewolves born under the birthright are not evil. Well, they most certainly are. They can't help it. It is in their very nature to be that way. But they are less inclined to be the complete bastards that the birthmark wolves are. So obviously, with these 2 rites of provenance, these 2 methods, the capacity exists for a lot of intersecting circles here, which makes for an interesting and a variety of types of werewolves, and there are several in my books. There's really no such thing as a garden variety werewolf in the series, and the ones that we get to know possess a character unique to them, which is determined not only by their rite of provenance, as we've just discussed, but also, like the rest of us, it's affected by their lot in life, by their circumstances. and also by their pedigree. Which beast prince are they most closely descended from? Because those 6 beast princes are known for different things. They have different qualities and traits, just like we do. So they each have their own personality, which is not something you find everywhere in a work of fiction regarding werewolves. And there's lots more of this, lots more to cover on this subject in episodes to come. Well, we're coming to an end of the 10 fears. This is a discussion that we began several jumps back, involving an article I wrote several years ago, linking some of the basic fears of mankind to 10 classic movie monsters. And so far we've done the Frankenstein monster and his bride, we've done Dracula, covered the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the Phantom of the Opera. And now we're getting to the home stretch now, and tonight we're going to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he's the only monster. Mr. Hyde is the only monster on this list who is not a universal monster. The film which most of us associate with Jekyll and Hyde is from 1932, Paramount Pictures, starring Frederick March. But he is a classic movie monster just the same. And let me start by saying, when we're talking about Mr. Hyde, that many people, including Stephen King, consider Mr. Hyde to be just another angle on the werewolf. And they're not wrong. Mankind's dual nature, our dark side, id versus ego, all that, it holds up. But I tend to think of things just a little bit differently when it comes to Edward Hyde as compared with, say, the Wolfman. Many of our deepest fears as humans have their origins in our primordial past. It's one of the basic premises on which my original article on the subject was based. But ironically, with Mr. Hyde, it's that same primordial past that's responsible for the fear at work in the mad lab of Dr. Jekyll. Now, in many ways, the good doctor and his malevolent alter ego do remind us of the Wolfman. He's a man, he changes into a beast-like brute, but Mr. Hyde isn't an animal. He's not a demon. Mr. Hyde is a throwback. He's an atavistic aberration. He is the cave that we came from and never wish to return to. That fear, the fear of losing what civility we have, rears its head every time the power goes out someplace for an extended period of time. Every post-apocalyptic series you may have seen, from The Walking Dead on down the line, it's that fear of losing everything that is right there with the zombies or the cannibals or whatever else they've got going on in their movie or their series. And it's the fact that humanity is really just a couple of natural disasters away from going back to the Stone Age. So let's take us back to Frederick March's portrayal of Hyde in 1932. His performance, that Mr. Hyde, disturbed me like no other classic monster ever did. I mean, not even close. I remember being mildly afraid of Dracula because he was so human-looking and you might not be able to spot him. But Mr. Hyde was such a son of a bitch in that movie. He was so cruel and played so convincingly as a total bastard by Frederick March that I really hated the guy. And he makes me, watching it to this day, he makes me uncomfortable to watch it. But his evil, the evil of Edward Hyde, is our own, largely consisting of no more than the fundamental drives of humanity that are left unchecked, our basic nature run amok, so to speak. His evil is what we fear ourselves capable of when we become uncivilized ourselves, when our culture gets stripped away from us and we become our uncivilized selves. Then we feel a kinship there that we don't want to feel. Now we shun, in our day-to-day life, we shun the primitive man with jokes and snide looks, and jokes about Neanderthal and cave people and such. And we shun that lowlier stage of our human development, and rightly so. It's Hyde who reminds us that just beneath the veneer of civilization lies the human beast. Dr. Jekyll is a cultured member of the aristocracy, a gentleman, which is a big deal in Victorian England. But he is reduced to the shuffling, snarling Mr. Hyde, to whom trampling children and murder are no moral dilemmas at all. Hyde longs to be free of the genteel Dr. Jekyll, and the horror begins when 100,000 years of human evolution are strangled and drowned in one gulp of Jekyll's serum. Okay, so let's talk shop. The Monster Hunter's Code. Guideline number 3 of the Monster Hunter's Code is that monsters neither abide by truces nor honor treaties. Your only option as a monster hunter, other than assured destruction, is to keep fighting. You can't afford to relax, not ever. So, what is that saying to us as monster hunters? Don't make the mistake of underestimating your prey. Don't make the mistake of mistaking the nature of your prey, would be more to the point. If you're fighting with monsters, you are looking into the abyss. And any gesture of compromise or capitulation on your part is going to be read as weakness, and more likely as an opportunity to be exploited at your expense. They don't honor truces. They don't believe in treaties. They may play along with such overtures as a ceasefire, but will use them only as a means to your end. So don't kid yourself because if you get tired of the bloodshed and the violence and you just want peace, you're so tired of fighting and blah, blah, blah. That may all very well be true. And if you've been fighting monsters very long, it is true. But know this, unless you're ready to die, it's not an option for you to give up. It's not an option for you to try to make peace with your adversary. It never was an option for you. They won't quit unless they are made to quit, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. And when your guard goes down, the game is up. Keep on fighting the good fight.
So tonight I thought I'd take the opportunity to share with you some of the skulls that I have in my collection to kind of give you an idea of scale of what I think a werewolf skull, the werewolves in my mythology, would be like. We'll start off with something very small. This is the skull of a female coyote. I took this skull back in the early 90s when I was trapping, and as you can see, it's about 8 inches long, about the size of a water bottle, or the length of a water bottle. No larger really than a medium-sized dog. But when we move on to the next one, this one is actually the skull of a average female black bear. And it's about 10 inches long. More robust around the ridges and so forth, but not as big as you might expect it to be. Now keep in mind, these skulls may look fairly small when there is meat on these, though, and fur. They're substantially bigger, so you have to allow for size. But this is the skull of a medium-sized or average-size black bear. This is a cast that I have of a dire wolf, prehistoric wolf, and it is 12 inches long. Try to hold it up here, we can kind of get a better look at it. And for many people, the dire wolf is kind of what they go by, and I have before myself. I've kind of taken them as an example of a werewolf, size of a werewolf skull, and that's a pretty good size. It's a pretty good size skull. Again, this is probably on the smaller size for the dire wolf. I've read where a lot of them come in at larger, fairly larger than the 12 inches that this one is. So I think it's safe to say that this one is probably also an average specimen, or cast from an average specimen.
Now this guy, on the other hand, you've probably seen him on the bar here since we've started this show, and this is a cast of a skull of a creature called Agriotherium. Agriotherium, or a bear dog. Now the bear dog is an extinct genus of bear that died out sometime in the Pleistocene, they say. And you can see his skull is absolutely enormous. It's about 19 inches from back to the front, to the nasal cavity there. Absolutely enormous. And to give you a further idea of scale, I'm going to take my model of a human skull here. And this is about right. This may actually be a little on the large size for a human skull. Once you add tissue and stuff, it would be a fairly good size head, I think. So probably on the largest size. And if I just take this skull, I can do this with it. And it fits neatly inside the jaws of the Agriotherium. So you can imagine a beast large enough to literally bite off your head with no effort whatsoever. Just open its mouth and chomp down. Thanks for joining me here tonight. I hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, visit me at www.werewolfhunter.com. Send me an email at brian@werewolfhunter.com. And be sure to follow me on Facebook. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to YouTube channel, which is down there in the bottom part of your screen. Just smash that little link right there. You'll be subscribed and you won't miss an episode. We'll see you next time. Good night.